I spent 40 years building this family, and one signature erased me. They didn't yell at me. They just stopped asking. I signed something I trusted and lost control of everything. That's when my own house stopped feeling like mine. I wasn't sick. I wasn't confused. I was inconvenient. That's when I stopped explaining and started watching. They thought I was fading. I was planning. I didn't take back my past. I positioned my future. They were celebrating too early. That's when the room went quiet. They didn't steal my inheritance. They exposed themselves. They took my silence for weakness. That was their last mistake. My name is Margaret Collins. Most people call me Maggie. I'm 70 years old, and until recently, I believed something very simple. That if you spend your whole life taking care of your family, they'll take care of you when it matters. Frank, my husband, used to say our house was more than wood and walls. It's proof, he'd say. Proof we didn't waste our time. We bought that house 40 years ago, back when Daniel was still learning how to ride a bike in the driveway and scraping his knees on the sidewalk. I packed lunches there, paid bills there, sat up nights worrying in that living room. So when Frank passed, I didn't panic. Why would I? The house was paid off. There was also a small rental property across town. Nothing fancy, just steady income. Enough for comfort. Enough for peace. Daniel started coming by more often after the funeral. At first, I appreciated it. He'd bring groceries, fix little things Frank used to handle. His wife, Rebecca, came too. Quiet, observant, always polite in that way that never quite warms up. One afternoon, Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table. I was wearing my soft beige cardigan, sipping tea, listening to him explain paperwork like it was nothing important. "Mom," he said, tapping the folder, "this is just in case anything ever happens. Power of attorney. Totally standard." I asked him what it meant. He smiled the same way he did when he was a teenager trying to explain why he missed curfew. "It just lets me help you," he said. "Pay bills, handle stuff. You shouldn't stress at your age." Rebecca nodded quietly. I didn't feel rushed. I didn't feel scared. That's the dangerous part. I trusted my son. I signed. No dramatic moment, no argument, just ink on paper. Life kept moving. But slowly, things changed. Bills stopped coming to my name. When I asked Daniel about it, he said, "I've got it handled." When I mentioned fixing the fence, Rebecca said, "We're deciding what makes sense long term." We. That word felt new. Then one day I noticed the mail slot was empty. Not late. Empty. Daniel explained they switched things to digital. "Less clutter," he said. Rebecca rearranged the pantry. The spare room became storage. Small things, quiet things. But they stacked up. And one morning, standing in my own kitchen, I realized something strange. I hadn't made a decision in weeks. Not one that mattered. I wasn't being yelled at. I wasn't being threatened. I was being managed. That night, lying in bed, I remembered something Frank once told me. People don't take power all at once, Maggie. They borrow it and forget to give it back. At the time, I thought he was talking about politics. Turns out he was talking about family. A few weeks after I signed those papers, I noticed the house felt quieter. Not peaceful quiet, organized quiet. The kind that happens when decisions are being made somewhere else. It started with something small. I needed to replace the old washing machine. The one Frank and I bought years ago finally gave up mid-cycle. Water everywhere, towels soaked. I called Daniel. "I'm thinking of getting a new one today," I said. "Just a basic model." There was a pause on the line. "I already ordered one," he replied. "Gets here Friday." I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at water pooling across the laundry room floor. "You ordered it?" I asked. "Yeah," he said casually. "Better deal online." He didn't ask what I wanted. He didn't ask if Friday worked. He just informed me. When the machine arrived, Daniel and Rebecca were both there. Rebecca inspected the space like it was hers to approve. "We should really update this room next," she said. "Make it more functional." I nodded, even though she wasn't talking to me. Later that week, I went to the bank, or at least I tried to. The teller smiled politely and asked for Daniel. "I'm Margaret Collins," I said. "I've been banking here for 30 years. She typed something, frowned slightly, then said, "You'll need your power of attorney present." I felt heat rise up my neck. "I just need to ask about a withdrawal," I said. "I'm sorry," she replied. "It's not authorized." I walked out without arguing, not because I agreed, because I didn't understand yet. That night, Daniel stopped by. I asked him about the bank. "Oh yeah," he said, taking off his jacket. "They flagged the account. It's for your protection." Protection. That word again. Rebecca walked into the room with her phone in hand. "We're simplifying things," she said. "Less stress for you." I wanted to ask when my life became stressful for them. Instead, I asked, "Can I still decide things?" Daniel hesitated, just for a second. "Of course," he said. "We just help." Help. I started noticing patterns after that. The mail wasn't just digital. It was filtered. Appointments were scheduled without checking with me. Rebecca told the neighbour I was cutting back on social stuff. I wasn't. I just wasn't being invited anymore. One afternoon, I overheard them talking in the living room. Rebecca said, "It's easier if we handle it now instead of later." Daniel replied, "Yeah, before it gets complicated." They stopped talking when they noticed me. I smiled. They smiled back. Nobody said anything. That's how it worked now. Silence did the heavy lifting. That evening, I went through the house slowly. The pantry shelves I used every day were reorganized. The spare room door was closed. A box of my old photo albums sat in the garage. Not thrown out, just relocated. I realized then I wasn't being pushed. I was being edged out, carefully, politely, with reasons that sounded responsible. That night, I called an old friend, Helen. She asked how I was doing. I almost said, "Fine." Instead, I said, "Do you ever feel like you're still here, but not really?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Who's deciding things for you?" That question stayed with me, because I knew the answer, and because I knew I hadn't given permission for it to go this far. Not out loud, but silence counts. That's what scared me. Not what they were doing, but how easily it was happening. It happened on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic about it. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just a sentence that changed how people looked at me. I was in the living room wearing my soft taupe cardigan, sorting through old receipts. Frank used to keep everything. I'd been meaning to organize them for years. Rebecca walked in, phone in hand. "Daniel scheduled your doctor's appointment for Thursday," she said. I looked up. "My doctor?" "Yes," she replied, scrolling. "Just a routine check. Memory stuff." Memory. I laughed lightly. "There's nothing wrong with my memory." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's just to be safe." Daniel came in right after. "Mom," he said, gentle voice. "We just want to make sure you're okay." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Did I say I wasn't?" I asked. "No," he said quickly, "but you forgot about the washing machine delivery." "I didn't forget," I said. "You ordered it without asking." He glanced at Rebecca. She stepped in. "It's small things like that," she said. "Little details." That's when I realized what was happening. They weren't checking on me. They were building a story. At the doctor's office, I sat alone in the waiting room wearing my muted lavender sweater. Daniel and Rebecca stayed in the hallway. I could hear them talking quietly at the desk. The nurse called my name. Inside, the doctor asked standard questions. "What day is it? Who's the president? Can you count backward?" I answered everything without hesitation. He nodded. "You seem sharp," he said. Relief washed over me. Then he added, "But stress can affect perception." Sometimes family notices changes before patients do. Perception. That word followed me home. Rebecca made soup that night. Too sweet. Too careful. She asked if I'd eaten. Daniel asked if I was tired. They weren't worried. They were documenting. A week later, the neighbour, Mrs. Klein, stopped me outside. Daniel mentioned you weren't feeling well, she said kindly. If you need anything. I smiled. I'm fine, I replied. But the seed had been planted. Soon, little comments followed. She gets confused sometimes. She doesn't remember conversations. She's overwhelmed. I started noticing how often they spoke for me. At the pharmacy, at church, at family gatherings. One afternoon, I tried to schedule a contractor to look at the roof. The man called back and said Daniel asked him to cancel. I confronted Daniel that evening. I didn't ask you to cancel, I said. He rubbed his forehead. Mom, you don't remember agreeing we'd wait? I stared at him. That conversation never happened. Rebecca folded her arms. You see, she said softly, this is what we're talking about. I felt the ground shift under my feet, not because I doubted myself, because I saw how easy it was to make others doubt me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after they went to bed. I wasn't scared yet. I was alert, because I understood something important. If enough people say you're confused, the truth stops mattering. What matters is who sounds confident. And right now, that wasn't me. The first real consequence didn't come with a fight. It came with a lock. I noticed it on a Thursday afternoon, right after lunch. I'd stepped out to sit on the porch for some air. When I came back inside, the front door didn't open on the first try. I tried again. Then I noticed the handle felt different, new. I checked my keys. Same keyring I'd carried for decades. I tried the lock slowly this time. It didn't turn. Rebecca's voice came from the kitchen. Oh, Daniel changed the locks this morning, she said casually. For security. Security. I stood there holding my keys, wearing my soft cream cardigan, staring at a door that no longer recognized me. He didn't mention it, I said. Rebecca shrugged. It was a last-minute thing. Daniel came in a moment later, wiping his hands on a towel like this was just another household task. Mom, he said, smiling a little too hard, we made you a new copy. It's in the drawer. I didn't ask which drawer, because the point wasn't the key. The point was that it happened without me. Later that day, I went to drive to the grocery store. I opened the garage door and saw my car pulled to the side, boxed in by Daniel's truck. I waited. He didn't move it. I walked back inside. Rebecca looked up from her phone. Oh, Daniel took your car earlier, she said. He thought it'd be easier if we shared. Shared. That evening, my friend Helen called. She wanted to meet for coffee. I'll drive over, I said. Daniel overheard. I can take you, he offered quickly. No need to trouble yourself. Trouble myself. I looked at him. I've been driving longer than you've been alive, I said. He laughed lightly. I know, Mom, just being helpful. Helpful had started to sound like a warning label. The next morning I opened the mailbox. Empty. Again. Later I found a small stack of mail on the counter already opened. Bank statements. Utility bills. I picked one up. Rebecca noticed. Oh, we go through those now, she said, so nothing important gets missed. I set the paper down. Not because I agreed, because I felt something shift. That afternoon, Daniel asked me to sit down. We should talk about living arrangements, he said. I stayed standing. What living arrangements? I asked. Rebecca spoke before he could. It's just planning. Long term. There it was. The word people use when they want to move you without admitting it. They talked about stairs, about safety, about options. I heard none of it. All I could think about was how quickly things had escalated. No warning, no conversation, just decisions. When they finished, Daniel asked, "What do you think?" I realized then that the question came too late. I said, "I think I need time." Rebecca smiled thinly. Of course. But her eyes said something else. That night, I went to my bedroom and closed the door. For the first time, I locked it. I sat on the edge of the bed wearing my light grey night sweater, listening to the house settle around me. Every sound felt louder. Every step in the hallway felt closer. I wasn't being yelled at. I wasn't being threatened. I was being rearranged, like furniture. And I understood something I should have seen sooner. Once someone decides you're a liability, your consent becomes optional. The first time someone corrected me in my own story, it wasn't Daniel or Rebecca. It was someone else. That's how I knew things had shifted. It happened at church on Sunday morning. I wore my soft pale blue cardigan, the one Frank liked because it reminded him of summer skies. I sat in my usual pew, the same place I'd been sitting for years. After the service, Mrs. Turner came over and hugged me gently. "How are you feeling today, Maggie?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Why?" She hesitated. "Oh, Daniel mentioned you've been a little overwhelmed lately." I smiled. "I'm doing just fine," I said again. She nodded slowly, the way people do when they don't believe you but don't want to argue. Later, near the coffee table, I overheard Rebecca speaking to someone from the choir. "We're just trying to keep things calm for her," she said quietly. "She doesn't always realize how much stress she's under." I stood a few feet away, close enough to hear, far enough to be invisible. When I spoke up, when I said, "I'm right here," the conversation stopped. Rebecca turned to me, surprised. "Oh, Maggie," she said lightly. "We were just talking about the bake sale." The lie was smooth, practiced. On the drive home, Daniel kept the radio on. Loud. Like noise could fill the space where conversation used to be. That afternoon, I decided to call the insurance company, just to confirm a detail about the house policy. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. "I'll need to speak with Daniel Collins," she said. "I am Margaret Collins," I replied. "It's my house." There was a pause. "I'm sorry," she said. "He's listed as the primary contact." Primary. That word landed harder than I expected. When Daniel came home, I asked him about it. "I didn't change anything," he said quickly. "It's just how the forms are set up." Rebecca added, "It's easier for companies to deal with one person." I asked. Why wasn't I asked? They exchanged a look. Daniel sighed. "Mum," he said, "you don't need to handle all this anymore." That sentence stayed with me, not because it was cruel, because it was final. A few days later, my neighbour stopped by with a casserole. "Daniel said you've been tired," she said kindly. "I thought you might not feel up to cooking." I thanked her, closed the door. Anne sat at the table staring at the food. I wasn't tired. I was being described that way. At the grocery store, Rebecca spoke to the cashier for me. At the pharmacy, Daniel answered questions meant for me. At dinner, plans were discussed without my input, and every time I tried to correct it, I was met with the same look. Concern, the kind that shuts people up faster than anger ever could. One evening I said something small. "I'd like to host Thanksgiving this year." Rebecca paused mid-bite. "We already talked about that," she said. "No," I replied. "We didn't." Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom," he said gently, "last year was a lot for you." I stared at him. "Frank had just died," I said. "Of course it was a lot." Rebecca reached across the table and touched Daniel's arm. "We just don't want to overwhelm her," she said. Overwhelm. That word had become their shield. I pushed my plate away. For the first time, I didn't feel confused. I felt clear. Because I saw the pattern. They weren't stealing my things. They were stealing my credibility. And once that's gone, everything else becomes easy. The day I stopped explaining myself was the day everything changed. Not on the outside, nothing dramatic happened. But inside, something clicked into place. I realized that every time I defended myself, I gave them something to push against. So I didn't. It started small. Rebecca asked what I wanted for dinner. "Whatever you think is best," I said. She looked surprised. Daniel asked if I wanted to go with them to the bank. "No." I said calmly. You handle it. They exchanged a glance. Relief. They thought they'd won. That night, wearing my soft charcoal cardigan, I sat at the kitchen table long after they went to bed. I pulled out an old address book. Frank's handwriting filled the pages, names I hadn't thought about in years. Our attorney, an accountant Frank trusted, a friend who worked in county records, people who remembered me as capable. I didn't call anyone yet. I just wrote the numbers down. The next morning, I started listening more than talking. Rebecca liked to narrate plans out loud. Once we renovate, the house will make sense again. Daniel talked about budgets, timelines, what's realistic. They spoke freely now, because I wasn't arguing. At lunch, Rebecca mentioned something that made my heart skip. Once everything's transferred, it'll be easier, she said. Transferred. I kept my face neutral. Transferred how? I asked lightly. She paused. You know, on paper. Daniel jumped in. Mom, don't worry about details. We've got it covered. I nodded. That afternoon, I asked Daniel to drive me to the library. I want some quiet, I said. He seemed pleased. At the library, I walked slowly through the aisles, wearing my dusty rose sweater, pretending to browse. But I wasn't there for books. I used one of the public computers. I searched property records, the house, the rental property, both still in my name. For now. But attached was a note I hadn't seen before. Pending changes. Nothing finalized. Yet. My hands were steady as I logged out. That evening, Rebecca mentioned they were meeting with a professional next week. What kind? I asked. She smiled. Just planning. Planning. The same word that had been used every time something was taken from me. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from fear. From clarity. The next day, I asked Daniel for something simple. I'd like copies of my documents, I said. Just for my records. He hesitated. Why? Because they're mine, I replied. The room went quiet. Rebecca recovered first. Of course, she said. We'll get them together. But the warmth was gone. That told me everything. Later, alone in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed wearing my soft oatmeal sweater. I wasn't angry. I wasn't panicked. I was focused. Because I finally understood the game. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence can also mean strategy. And for the first time since Frank died, I felt like myself again. Daniel and Rebecca made one mistake. They assumed my world had shrunk, that once Frank was gone, all I had left was them. They didn't realize I still had people, quiet ones, patient ones, who remembered who I was before I became someone to manage. I started with a phone call. I waited until the house was empty, put on my soft forest green cardigan, and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Arthur Levin, a voice answered. It's Maggie Collins, I said. There was a pause, then warmth. Maggie, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Arthur had been our attorney for decades. He helped Frank and me buy our first home. He knew every signature we'd ever put on paper. We didn't talk about Daniel at first. We talked about Frank, about time passing, about how quiet houses get. Then I told him everything. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just facts. He listened. When I finished, he said one sentence that steadied me. Nothing has been transferred without your consent. Yet. The word mattered. He explained how power of attorney worked, what it allowed, what it didn't. People misuse it all the time, he said, especially when they think no one's watching. I smiled to myself. Someone was watching now. The next call was to Frank's old accountant, Mrs. Hale. She still remembered my birthday, still sent handwritten notes. She confirmed something else. The rental income was being rerouted. Not stolen, redirected, quietly. Temporary changes, she said carefully. The kind people don't notice until it's permanent. That night at dinner, I said nothing. Rebecca talked about renovations. Daniel talked about timelines. They were comfortable again. That was good. Comfort makes people sloppy. A few days later, Daniel mentioned a meeting. "We're meeting with a financial advisor next Friday," he said. "You don't need to come. It'll be boring." "I'd like to attend," I replied calmly. Rebecca froze for half a second, then smiled. "Of course," she said, "if you're feeling up to it." "Feeling up to it?" I nodded. Friday came. I wore my deep navy blouse, hair neatly pinned, posture straight. The advisor greeted Daniel first, then Rebecca, then turned to me, surprised. "And you are?" "I'm Margaret Collins," I said, "the homeowner." The room shifted. As the meeting went on, I listened carefully. They spoke in assumptions. When the advisor mentioned future ownership, I asked him to clarify. He hesitated. "Well, eventually." "Eventually isn't a plan," I said. "It's a hope." Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom," I held up my hand. "Let him finish," I said politely. The advisor looked relieved. Afterward, in the parking lot, Rebecca's voice was tight. "You didn't need to say all that," she said. "I did," I replied. Daniel said nothing. That told me more than words ever could. That evening, Arthur called back. "I've reviewed everything," he said. "You're not trapped, but you are close." Close. That was fine, because close meant there was still time. I didn't tell Daniel or Rebecca what I knew. I didn't confront them. I didn't threaten. I let them think the story was still theirs to tell. Because the best revenge isn't loud. It's accurate. The tone changed after that meeting. Not immediately, but enough that I felt it. Rebecca stopped explaining things to me. Instead, she started informing me. Daniel became quieter, careful with his words, like someone choosing every step on thin ice. It started with a conversation after dinner. We were in the living room. I was wearing my soft slate blue sweater, knitting slowly, keeping my hands busy. Rebecca sat across from me. "Mum," she said. She'd started calling me that recently. "We've been talking about what's best for everyone." Everyone. That word again. Daniel leaned against the doorway. "We think it might be good for you to take a break," he said. "Go stay with Aunt Carol for a while." I looked up. "A break from what?" I asked. Rebecca answered gently. "From responsibility." I set the knitting down. "My responsibilities," I said. "Or yours," Daniel sighed. "Mum, don't make this harder than it needs to be." There it was. The first crack in the politeness. I stood up slowly. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. Rebecca smiled tightly. "We're not saying you don't have a choice," she said. "We're just saying there are easier options." "Easier?" I asked. "What happens if I say no?" The room went quiet. Daniel spoke carefully. "Then we may need to involve professionals," he said. "For your safety." Professionals. The word landed heavy. I nodded. "Is that a threat?" I asked calmly. "No," Rebecca said quickly. "It's concern." Concern had teeth now. The next day, a social worker called. She said Daniel and Rebecca had expressed worry about my memory, my stress levels, my ability to live independently. The call was polite, structured, dangerous. I answered her questions honestly. She said she'd follow up. That afternoon, I went for a walk alone. I wore my light camel coat, hands tucked into the pockets, heart steady. I wasn't panicking, I was measuring. Because once people start involving outsiders, the story stops being private. That night, Daniel knocked on my door. "We're just trying to help," he said. "I know," I replied. He hesitated. "Then why are you making this so difficult?" I looked at him. "Because you stopped asking," I said. He didn't have an answer. Rebecca didn't speak to me for 2 days after that. On the third day, she left pamphlets on the kitchen counter. Assisted living, support services, peace of mind. I flipped through them slowly. Every picture showed smiling people who looked managed. That evening, Arthur called. "I heard from someone at the county," he said. They're laying groundwork. I closed my eyes. How long do I have? I asked. Before they try to formalize control, he said. Not long. That night, I packed a small bag, not to leave, but to be ready. Because I understood something now. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to remove me, cleanly, quietly, legally. And the scariest part? They still believed they were the good guys. They thought I was reacting. That was their mistake. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was moving. The morning after Arthur's call, I woke up early. The house was quiet. Daniel and Rebecca were still asleep. I put on my soft stone-grey cardigan, brushed my hair neatly, and made coffee like it was any other day. Normalcy is powerful. It keeps people from asking questions. When Daniel came into the kitchen, I smiled. "Good morning," I said. He looked relieved, like the storm had passed. "I'm heading out for a bit," I added. "Just errands." "Want me to drive you?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'll take a cab." Rebecca appeared in the doorway. "A cab?" she repeated. "Yes," I said calmly. "I like the independence." She didn't argue. That told me they were still watching their tone. The cab dropped me off downtown 2 blocks from Arthur's office. Inside, the air felt steady, familiar, safe. Arthur didn't waste time. "We're locking things down today," he said. He laid out documents carefully. A revocation of power of attorney, updated instructions, emergency contacts changed. "This doesn't start a war," he said. "It just puts you back in control." I signed. This time I read every word. Next, we walked across the street to a notary, then to the bank. The woman at the counter smiled politely. "How can I help you, Mrs. Collins?" "I'd like to change account access," I said. She nodded. Daniel's name was removed. Mine remained. Quiet, clean, legal. By noon, 3 things had happened. They no longer controlled my finances. They no longer had legal authority over me. They didn't know yet. Arthur warned me. "When they find out, they'll push back." "I expect that," I said. "What matters is timing." That afternoon, I stopped by the rental property. The tenant recognized me immediately. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Just checking in." He smiled. "It's good to see you again." Again. That word mattered. When I returned home, Rebecca was in the kitchen. She noticed the envelope in my hand. "What's that?" she asked casually. "Mail," I replied. Daniel came in shortly after. They both watched me, waiting. I didn't give them anything. That evening the call came. Daniel's phone rang. I saw his expression change. He listened, said nothing, then hung up. "What's wrong?" Rebecca asked. He looked at me. "The bank says there was a change," he said slowly. "Yes," I replied. Rebecca's smile disappeared. "You didn't discuss this with us," she said. I met her eyes. "Because it wasn't a group decision." Daniel stepped forward. "Mum, no," I said quietly. "I'm still capable of deciding when something is my business." The room felt smaller. Rebecca crossed her arms. "This is going to complicate things," she said. "It already did," I replied. "You just didn't expect it to be complicated for you." That night, they whispered in their bedroom. I didn't listen. I didn't need to, because I finally understood something they hadn't counted on. I didn't need to take their future. I just needed to stop giving them mine. The kindness didn't disappear all at once. It cracked. And through those cracks, I finally saw what they'd been hiding. The morning after the bank call, the house felt tense. Not loud, tight, like everyone was holding their breath. I came into the kitchen wearing my soft pearl grey sweater, poured myself coffee and sat down. Rebecca didn't say good morning. Daniel hovered near the counter, phone in hand. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "You embarrassed us yesterday," she said. I looked up. "At the bank?" "Yes," she replied sharply, "in front of people." I nodded slowly. "You tried to take control of my finances," I said. Quietly, Daniel cut in. "That's not fair." "What part?" I asked. "The control or the quiet?" He clenched his jaw. We were doing what was best, he said. I leaned back in my chair. Best for who? I asked. Rebecca exhaled hard. This house is expensive, she said. The upkeep, the taxes. We're the ones dealing with it. I smiled faintly. No, I said. You wanted the convenience without the responsibility. That's when her tone changed. You're being selfish, she snapped. There it was, the word people use when they don't get what they planned for. Daniel stepped closer. Mom, you're making things difficult on purpose. I met his eyes. You made decisions about my life without asking me, I said. And now you're upset, I noticed. Rebecca laughed bitterly. You wouldn't have managed any of this without us, she said. That one hurt. Not because it was true, because she wanted it to be. I stood up slowly. I raised you, I said to Daniel. I ran a household. I paid bills. I built stability. That was a long time ago, Rebecca said. The silence that followed was sharp. Daniel didn't defend me. That told me everything. Later that afternoon, voices rose for the first time. Rebecca accused me of being manipulative. Daniel accused me of not trusting them. I accused them of rewriting history. You were fine with everything until you lost control, Daniel said. No, I replied. I was fine until I realized what you were doing with it. Rebecca slammed her hand on the counter. We rearranged our lives for you, she said. And this is how you repay us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask you to, I said. That stopped her, because it was true. That night, Daniel said something he couldn't take back. If you keep this up, he said, don't expect us to keep living here. I nodded. That's your choice, I said. Rebecca stared at me. You'd really let your own son walk away? She asked. I answered honestly. I won't hold someone hostage with property, I said. Even family. The room went quiet. Not shocked quiet. Calculating quiet. I realized then that love had already left the conversation. What remained was leverage, and they no longer had it. Later, alone in my room wearing my soft midnight blue robe, I sat at the window and thought about Frank, about how he warned me, about how people don't steal all at once. They push, they test, they see how much you'll give before you notice. I didn't cry that night. I felt something stronger. Certainty. Because once someone shows you who they are when they're losing, you can finally believe them. The ultimatum didn't come in anger. It came wrapped in concern. That's how I knew it was serious. It was Sunday evening. The house was unusually quiet. Rebecca had cooked dinner, something warm and nostalgic, like she was trying to reset the tone. I wore my soft sand-coloured sweater and sat at the table across from them. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, he said, we need to talk about what happens next. I nodded. Okay, I said. Rebecca folded her hands together like this was a meeting she'd rehearsed. We've been patient, she said, but things can't keep going like this. I waited. Daniel leaned forward. If you don't trust us, he said, then maybe it's time we rethink living arrangements. There it was. Clean, careful, sharp. Meaning? I asked. Rebecca answered. If you insist on handling everything yourself, she said, then maybe this isn't the healthiest environment for you. I smiled faintly. For me, I repeated. Daniel sighed. This isn't about winning, he said. It's about family. Family. The word felt thin now. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said. Rebecca didn't hesitate. Reinstate the power of attorney, she said. Let us manage things again. Fully. And if I don't? I asked. Daniel looked down. Rebecca spoke. Then we'll have to consider other options. Like what? I asked. She met my eyes. Legal ones. There it was. The final card. I leaned back in my chair. So this is conditional, I said calmly. My place in this family depends on paperwork. Daniel raised his voice for the first time. That's not fair. What part? I asked. The condition or the truth? Rebecca stood up. We put our lives on hold for you, she said. We could have been building our own future. I nodded. And instead, I said, you tried to take mine. Silence. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. If you don't cooperate, he said, don't expect us to stay. I looked at him. You've already decided to leave, I said. You're just deciding what you want to take with you. Rebecca's face hardened. You think you're so smart, she said. But you're alone in this. That one almost landed. Almost. But then I remembered something Arthur told me. Control collapses when fear stops working. I stood up slowly. I'm not alone, I said. I just stopped confusing silence with weakness. Daniel stared at me. So that's it? He asked. You're choosing this over us? I answered honestly. I'm choosing myself, I said. You're the ones making it an or situation. Rebecca laughed coldly. You'll regret this, she said. Maybe. But regret and dignity aren't the same thing. That night, they packed a few bags. Not everything, just enough to make a point. Daniel stood at the door. This isn't over, he said. I know, I replied. When the door closed, the house felt different. Not emptier, clearer. I sat in the living room wearing my soft ivory cardigan, listening to the quiet. No tension, no performance, just truth. They had made their move, and now it was my turn to finish it. My turn to eat. The house didn't feel lonely after they left. It felt honest. For the first time in months, no one was monitoring my movements. No one was narrating my choices. No one was quietly deciding what I could handle. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning, I put on my soft dove grey sweater, made coffee, and sat at the table where so many conversations had been controlled without me. I didn't rush. Revenge isn't rushed. Arthur came by that afternoon. He spread the documents out carefully, like someone who understood the weight of paper. Everything is finalized, he said. Exactly as you asked. I nodded. We reviewed it one last time. The house? Still mine. The rental property? Placed in a trust, but not for Daniel, not for Rebecca. For a scholarship fund Frank and I once talked about but never created. For kids who didn't have anyone pulling strings behind their backs. Arthur looked at me. You're certain? He asked. Yes, I said. I already gave enough to people who thought they were entitled to it. Daniel called 3 days later. I let it ring. Rebecca emailed. Long message. Emotional. Strategic. I didn't reply. A week later, Daniel showed up alone. He looked tired, smaller. He stood in the doorway like a guest. I just want to understand, he said. Then listen, I replied. We sat across from each other. I didn't take anything from you, I said calmly. I stopped you from taking it from me. That money was supposed to help us build our future, he said. I nodded. And you tried to build it by erasing me from mine. He looked down. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. That's the thing, I replied. People never do. I handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter. Not legal. Personal. I'd written it carefully. I explained my decision. I explained the trust. I explained that he would still receive something when I was gone. Just not control. Just not ownership. Just not permission over my life. He read it silently. Rebecca never came back. She didn't need to. Her absence answered everything. On a quiet afternoon weeks later, I walked through the house wearing my soft linen white cardigan, touching the walls Frank and I painted together. Nothing had been stolen from me. I had been tested. And for the first time, I passed. People think revenge is about destruction. It's not. It's about boundaries. It's about saying, you don't get to benefit from what you tried to take. I didn't steal their future. I removed myself from it, and in doing so, I finally reclaimed my own.